Hi, everyone. We're going to wait a few more moments to let some other attendees join. Thank you guys for joining. All right, and we're going to get started. My name is Sarah Lutz, and I am the Community Outreach and Events Specialist for the Better Business Bureau serving Western Virginia. Welcome, and thank you guys for joining today. Attendees are comprised of business owners and leaders across Western Virginia. And on behalf of BBB, we want to say we are proud to serve you all and your business, especially during times like these. We hope today's webinar will provide useful information regarding security measures while working remotely. A couple of call outs before we start. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, on your control panel on the right side, there's going to be a questions tab, and you can type in your questions there, and we will answer them at the very end of the presentation. During the presentation, Sean will have some polls that will go out. We'll mention those and then be on the lookout for those on the right side on your control panel as well, and you can respond to those polls. And lastly, a recording of this webinar and the slide deck will be sent to you via the weekly digest email that'll go out. So that way, if you want to go back and review it, or if you want to send it to somebody else, you can do that. And without further ado, I will introduce our wonderful guest speaker today. Sean Peters is the president and founder of Tech Squared Incorporated, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you for joining us and being our guest speaker today.
Thank you, Sarah.
Let me switch. There we go, and now you should be able to share your screen.
All right. Okay, can you see my screen, Sarah?
I can.
Fantastic. As Sarah said, I am the founder of Tech Squared. We work in the IT and security, cybersecurity industry. Have been doing so for 20 years. Have learned a lot of what my company does the hard way. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of things that are broken along the way, and we're currently in an unprecedented time where a lot of that knowledge is coming to bear. We have done everything from basic computer security all the way up to and including helping customers pay Bitcoin to have things unlocked or unencrypted as they were not properly secured ahead of time. So I've been doing this for about 20 years. The intent with this is to give some less technical information, some considerations, security things to consider for working remotely. Typically, what you will find is that the easier the remote is to use, the less secure it is. And we'll go through a couple of those as we go through the presentation. There's always a balance between the cost, the usability, and the security. So if it's very, very usable and it's very, very secure, typically the cost goes up. The easier it is to use, the less secure it is, the less it will typically cost. And part of the reason I greatly appreciate the Better Business Bureau for putting this on is it gives us an opportunity to really speak to some of the human resource side of this. I would wager that a lot of you are already being given the how to work from home process by your company, and either from that perspective or as a perspective from leadership, understanding that your people are typically the highest point of vulnerability. They are the highest point of entry for challenges. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through. And then that risk versus security is that critical conversation with leadership, meaning there's that balance, as I said previously, the cost versus the usability versus the security. If you're not working with personal health information, social security numbers, then the need for security goes down a little bit, and it's a matter of different businesses balancing that security versus the cost, depending on the nature of their business. Some businesses need to be a little more secure than others, healthcare being one that needs to be super secure. And then training and communication is key. Continued communication with your people, either through training or expectations, or continuing to look for better ways to secure your environment. The first topic we're going to touch on is the environment, and we've had a lot of challenges in this environment as folks have gone through not having already considered which computer they're going to use. Are they going to be using a work computer, or are they going to be using a personal device to access company resources? Once again, if you think back to the security versus the usability, if all of a sudden a business has to be responsible for getting a personal device connected to the network or accessing company resources, that can take a lot of time, also create a lot of liability, as they have no view of what is on that personal device ahead of time. You can do that with different technologies such as Citrix, where there really is no interaction, but that needs to be thought through. If you are using a workstation at the office and not a laptop, not something that is easily portable, how do you access that? Or do you take that workstation home and use a VPN to connect back to the office? If the personal device is the one being used, how is that secured? Is that secured through the business now taking responsibility for what is on that personal device, or is it done in a manner where they are completely separate? A Citrix type environment is completely separate. It will interface with the work, but there is no passing of information back and forth. In addition to the device or the computer, where you're working is going to be important. Is this a private office space? Is this a dining room table? Is this a den area? And who has access to that area as we are isolating and self-quarantining? Are your children? My children are at home and they're moving around. Do I have devices? Do I have paperwork? Do I have information that is available should I walk away? Am I leaving those sensitive documents around? If you're in the business of a CPA or preparing taxes and you're working from home, are you leaving customers' personal information, tax IDs, social security numbers, business sensitive information? In my line of work, I have actually seen business information filter back through family members to my children back to me when there were compromises in network. It's been very, very interesting. So where you're working and how you're securing that. Do others know? Do family members know? Do friends know that is an area where you are working and there's not supposed to be anything else in that area? Passwords, access information, security tokens. We've seen folks use sticky notes and we'll look at passwords a little bit later, they can be complex, they can be long, and how is it that those are being remembered, or are they written down? Are they being left somewhere? The number of times prior to this quarantine, I've walked in, lifted up a keyboard and found a sticky note under the keyboard with password information. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that happen. Big no-no, and we'll share a little bit later how to remember a password that is longer without having to necessarily write it down. Are you locking the computer when you're absent, when you step up and walk away? Most work computers do or should have a timeout where after 4 or 5 minutes, depending on the risk of the risk level of the business, they will have an automatic lockout where that screen will lock. If you're working from home and you're using a personal device, is there a lock that is password protected so other folks can't get into it? And it's not that they won't, or they will choose to, but it's accidental. If you're using a larger screen, some of that information is easy to see and not necessarily something that your customers would appreciate if other people saw. The hardware, little bit of a reiteration there, the personal or the work computer. Work computer, we have had a lot of customers take the desktop home because there's typically not a need for a laptop in a lot of environments. We recommend taking a picture of that computer setup before you unplug it. That also includes the connections in the back of the computer so that you know how things plug back in. It can be challenging as there are many different shapes and sizes of plugs to know what plugs are for what unless you're technical. Monitors can connect 3 or 4 different ways with 3 or 4 different styles of connection depending on what you are using. Be it a laptop or a workstation, and yes, workstations can be wireless. I know there are workstations that we use quite a bit that have a wireless connection built in. You can also find add-on wireless adapters if you're in a location where that workstation cannot be wired. One thing to consider with wireless over the wired connection is making sure to turn off automatic connections on the Wi-Fi. And what that means is if you're working from home, there are neighborhoods where occasionally, if you have been connected to a different Wi-Fi and the neighbor happens to have that same Wi-Fi name, your laptop may jump between Wi-Fis. In addition, hackers will use a device called a Wi-Fi pineapple that is created to specifically interrupt that Wi-Fi connection and serve as a pass-through. So you want to make sure that automatically connecting to Wi-Fi is something that you turn off in order to reduce the risk if possible. And then webcams. Webcams are very, very useful, especially in an instance like this, where you are video conferencing, where you are using software to work with teammates. Recommend either turning off the webcam, which can be software based, or a lot of laptops now are coming with a slider, or some common giveaways are sliders to cover the webcam so that you know the webcam is not recording. We have seen over the last month or so, that purchasing new webcams is almost impossible. Laptops, very similar. We're seeing a very low level. Folks are buying those constantly, trying to get ready for the telework. That is starting to lighten up, but something with the external webcams are not typically easy to come by. One thing that businesses sometimes don't realize is that the internet connection speeds, especially if using a VPN, may not be sufficient for the work that is going on. And what I mean by that is a VPN connection will tie your work computer into the office, and then the office is the one responsible for all of your web browsing, meaning that when you browse a website while that VPN is connected, it's not just using your network resources, but it is also using the network resources, both download and upload from the office location. And so when you're browsing on a VPN, it is downloading that page essentially to the office and then also downloading it or uploading it to your home. And so most cable modems, which are very prevalent in Southwest Virginia, their upload speeds are not near as fast as their download speeds. So sometimes when working from home, your internet browsing can seem slow, and it's because it's having to download it at the office and then turn around and upload it to you on a slower connection. And that's not something that can be really fixed up to a certain point. Your internet service providers have the ability to give you faster upload speeds, but they will never be as fast as the download speeds. It is a limitation of the design. It's known as asynchronous. Your download speeds are much faster. It's typically because the only thing going back or uploading is your click. The download is everything else. It's almost reversed in a VPN style setting because that upload is then sending it to you at the house. Internet access restrictions. Some ISPs restrict access to different business usage. It's not as common as it used to be. VPNs did not used to connect on some of your internet service providers and may still be the case. The internet service provider sees VPN usage as a business case and doesn't want those being used on a personal connection because you're essentially then working from home. At this stage, I have not seen any providers in the area that are limiting VPNs. They do, however, limit other things such as remote file sharing in Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud. That's not OneDrive, it is Azure file sharing is very similar to sharing files off of a local server. That is not typically possible behind a personal residential type connection because there are ports that are blocked in order to safeguard the network. And then we'll step back to the one that I skipped, and that is VoIP connections. They may not work due to the configuration of the provider. It could be the router that you're using, it could be the modem and how that is configured, or it could be the provider where they are actually blocking the ports necessary. Something to consider with hardware is that personal devices are typically less secure than work computers. A lot of them don't require passwords to log in. They don't lock down after a specific period of time. Sometimes patching, if it is not being managed in some way, when a patch doesn't install, a lot of personal devices are not configured to alert a user and say these patches are not installing, it's vulnerable. And then antivirus and anti-malware, while Microsoft does build in antivirus to their Windows 10, it is not necessarily as efficient as a more robust business grade software. One of the things to consider with personal devices, and this is true of work as well, is during this, don't visit unfamiliar websites. There are a lot of attacks. There's a lot of email going through that is being received, and it's asking folks to go to different websites that they might not be familiar with. Be very, very cautious of that. Work devices, in comparison, will typically have, if an IT department or an outsourced IT provider is involved, typically is monitoring and maintaining those patches, those updates, and those updates include not just Windows updates, but updates to your Chrome, to your Firefox, to your Microsoft Office, and other third-party software like your Adobe Acrobat. Those patches are typically managed by the IT department or the outsourced provider. And then typically work devices already have remote support capability, meaning there is usually an agent of some sort that would allow an IT department to connect to your machine to see what you're seeing and help troubleshoot your connection. That is one of the advantages of using a work device, either a workstation or laptop that is taken home, is that remote support is a lot easier to come by, as they are typically already configured to do that. In addition, your software is typically already installed, be it Adobe, Microsoft Office, PowerPoint, and you don't have to worry about licensing or software install on the personal devices. For remote access, one of the things that we have found is there are a lot of folks that don't know how to use some of these technologies from outside the office, meaning if they don't have Outlook, what is the webmail or the internet-based portal for receiving and sending email? If they are simply accessing the website, they don't necessarily need Outlook. So you're going to need to know where your webmail is located. Outlook is very popular in the business community for sending and receiving email. That's something that's going to need to be, if you're not using a work device that has Outlook, webmail is probably going to be your default. And then also mobile devices, be it cell phones or iPads. One challenge again is the personal device versus the work device. The VPN is probably a word that folks have heard a lot of over the last couple of weeks, and that means virtual private network. What it essentially accomplishes is it connects your device to the office as if you're inside the office. The challenge with that is making sure that it is secure, and there are VPN connections that, when done improperly, essentially allow any device on your personal network to access the work network, which is very, very concerning to an IT staff. Depending on how that is set up, that should not be the case. The VPN should limit that access to your laptop or your workstation and not give access to everything on both sides. That can be a configuration error. We find that a lot of security issues, are driven by configuration error, not someone trying to cause a problem and issues potentially spreading. The VPN does allow direct access of those resources as you normally would inside the office. However, remember the bandwidth that we talked about, they can be a little bit slower. So normally being inside the office, opening a spreadsheet or opening a document, it will take a few seconds longer, depending on the size. A PowerPoint that is 5 megabytes, while that would open very quickly inside the office, there are times on a VPN that may take 10 minutes for that to come all the way across. Remember, your office location is uploading at a much slower speed than if you were inside the office and accessing it directly from the server. Heavier applications like QuickBooks, while they will work, will appear to be super, super slow. Your QuickBooks data file is quite large. And so accessing that data file across the VPN can be super, super slow. Where this is beneficial and helpful is if you're not using a different style of remote access. It is one that will allow you to work. And what we have seen is over the last 5 years or so, the speeds of office and home connections have been so much faster than they were 10 years ago that they are usable. They're a little clunky and a little bit slow, but they will work if you don't have some of the additional remote access software that would allow you to work as if you are in the office. One place that we see VPNs used a lot is with laptops. The reason for that is that device contains everything. They are connecting into the office and using those resources. The challenge with the next round of the next softwares I'm going to show you is that if you are accessing the work device, it's much more difficult and not really possible if you already have that work device with you like you would with a laptop. So some of the remote access that we see very popular, Log Me In, is one where there is a monthly subscription where from a website, we see this very popular when needing to access from a personal device. You will log into the Log Me In website. It will then allow you to connect to your desktop at the office. That is relatively secure. Consider password length and who potentially has access to that, as it does allow access to the workstation from anywhere that there is web access, libraries, etc., become one of those concerns. And as folks are setting up remote access into the office, one thing to consider is as this concludes, as this season concludes, making sure that password rotation or a disconnect of these remote access services, if they are not required in the future, is considered. Having a Log Me In account where the password never expires and never gets changed leaves a huge vulnerability 2 years from now if for some reason your password gets compromised because you reuse that password somewhere else. Jump Desktop is a very neat application which is similar to Log Me In that allows access from the outside. We see Jump Desktop used a lot with iPads, where that iPad is the remote device, and the Jump Desktop essentially allows the user to connect to the desktop at the office and use it as if they are there. There are two typical functions with the Jump Desktop to consider. There is a VNC style connection, and there is a remote desktop protocol or RDP protocol. The consideration between those two is that VNC leaves your computer unlocked while you're using it. And so if you're using Peachtree or you're using QuickBooks, the concern there is making sure you're using the one that is right for your security. VNC is an option at times because a remote user, if they're using a laptop or an iPad, remote desktop will not allow seeing multiple screens, which can be challenging for folks that are working on a workstation that is attached to multiple monitors, where VNC will allow that. Remote desktop, also known as RDP, is one of the highest compromises when it comes to security. It's very easy to use. It's built into almost every single Microsoft operating system, both Windows 10 as well as server operating systems, and it's one that we have seen quite a few compromises come through remote desktop. The reason being that is typically open directly to the world and only secured by a password. Citrix is one where it allows access from almost any device. It can, however, be expensive and difficult to set up. It's that balance that we talked about earlier, where the more secure it is and the easier it is to use, that cost typically goes up. Some of the complexity goes up with that product. Citrix is amazing in that it leverages technologies to allow you to use personal devices, phones, iPads, laptops, without much configuration to access many applications inside the work environment. QuickBooks is one that would benefit from a Citrix style connection because you're actually using QuickBooks at that point on the server. You're not using it across a VPN or slowly, and then you have the full security of Citrix and the office security, not just a remote desktop, something like Citrix is typically managed by an IT department instead of, and is not very common in smaller offices. File sharing considerations with regard to remote access. OneDrive is Microsoft's product. It is typically included in a lot of Office 365 subscriptions. Most users will end up with about 1 terabyte of possible storage. With Microsoft, anybody that is in an Office environment, a Microsoft Office 365 environment, benefits from this in that they can use multiple devices. They can share those files. OneDrive is very, very good for Word, Excel documents that you need on the go. They have integrations with phones, iPads, laptops, etc. Dropbox is one that kind of defined the file sharing space. And so there are a lot of folks that use Dropbox. They have personal as well as business accounts. Business accounts are good because you can share files between multiple users where sharing with the personal connections can be done. It's not quite as seamless as it is with a business connection. iCloud is one that is pretty popular with regard to Macs or Apple products. It is typically built into all of their products. And then one I forgot to put on here is Google Drive. Google Drive is another one that is integrated into a lot of your Android and your Chromebooks. That you will see a lot of Google Drive usage. Cloud communication, Teams, that's one option if you're using Office 365. We have found that Zoom has become extremely popular with a lot of schools and businesses. However, there are currently a lot of security concerns with Zoom, and so they're working on fixing those security issues, meaning folks have been able to drop in on Zoom conversations throughout in the middle of a presentation. And GoToMeeting, it's one that we are using here for a presentation, but GoToMeeting has some pretty robust technologies for not just webinars, but also meetings. They have several options with regard to presentations and meetings in general. Instead of traveling, using the GoToMeeting can get a bunch of folks together. Similarly, as you compare those, you're going to see a difference in ease of use versus security versus cost as you look at those. One other thing that we have seen businesses struggle with over the last couple of weeks has been business phones. The use of voice over IP. IP is the communication protocol throughout the internet. It's what does all of our, it provides all of our web browsing, and it's very easy, relatively speaking, to have voice on that same internet. The challenge with some phone systems is that they don't allow seamless usage from the outside, while some phone systems will. The newer phone systems will allow your smartphone and or your laptop to work as if it's in the office, accepting phone calls, as well as making phone calls out based on that same number. So in my business, as we are supporting users, when we started working from home, all of the engineers were able to dial customers as if they were working in the office. The caller ID was that of the office. One of the challenges that we see with that is if the ISP, the router, or the modem is misconfigured for voice over IP. So what we have found, just one in particular, Verizon connections typically have what they call SIP ALG configured, which can disrupt the flow of IP, voice over IP traffic, and end up with odd things like dropped calls one-way audio, and so there has been a lot of working with those providers to get those things right. One thing to consider with allowing outbound calls from a phone system that they appear as the office number is that remembering in that scenario, the 911 may not be correct, as that is typically registered to the office location. And so remembering that as those phones are portable or they're moving, remembering to use your cell phone as opposed to the work phone for 911, because the registration is not changing. The provider doesn't know to change the address if you are moving the phone. Last but not least, on the remote access, so I've got one more slide on this one, backup. How is the work you're doing protected? Meaning if you have a desktop or a laptop at home and you're producing work product, be it Excel spreadsheets, Word documents on that device, are they being backed up? Are they being placed on the server through a VPN connection? Are they being backed up with a local backup process, or are they being stored in a cloud file storage? What is the backup mechanism there, and is it tested? Meaning, how often are you looking to see if you can get that information back? We've been working remotely, at least my team has been working remotely for a little over a month now. We started working remotely very, very early because we were already ready to do so. And so making sure that critical information is stored either on the server or in a cloud application, and verifying backups are only good if they are verified. Meaning, I have seen backups that folks thought were running for a year, but they never tested or restored to make sure they could get that document back. So consider, if the laptop is turned off or destroyed or lost, is it still possible to get that information back that you are producing? And if not, what do you need to do to have it secured so that should the laptop be lost, stolen, broken, or otherwise fail, that you're able to retain the work product that you have currently. Sarah, I believe we have a poll on passwords, if you wanted to put that up.
Waiting on a few more votes. All right, and the results are in, and 100% no.
And forgive me, remind me the question.
Do you have a password 14 characters or longer? So
that one is a doozy. Most folks don't realize, if you see at the bottom, that 10 characters or less and 14 characters or longer is typically that breaking point for passwords. It's one where we need to consider longer passwords. As everything is becoming cloud-based, remember that that means it's accessible from outside your office. It is accessible from other places. And what attackers will do is they will use an algorithm and a dictionary and literally continue trying to guess your password until they get one that works. So a couple things to consider with passwords: at least 14 characters long. And yes, my computer password is more than 14 characters long. I actually counted it as I was working through this, and right now it is about 16 characters. That they are a phrase and not a single word. What I mean by that, a lot of the reason passwords are shorter is that they're easier to remember. There are a couple things that can help with that, and that is making a phrase and not necessarily just a single word. And then if you see the requirement for the upper, lower characters and punctuation within that phrase, you can be very, very creative. So I took my dog to the park. You can replace the O in dog with a 0. You can replace the I at the very beginning of that phrase with an exclamation point, and it becomes much easier to remember than a bunch of random characters. And so consider a phrase. Consider part of mine is based on goals that I wish to achieve. And so not only do I have a longer phrase, a longer password, but I also have a reminder of something I am looking to accomplish. And then make sure it's not based on personal information. Good reason for not using personal information is it seems to be a trend here lately that everybody wants to ask and answer personal information on Facebook. If you're using personal information in your passwords, and you're sharing the name of your dog online, or you're sharing the names of your kids, you're connected to them on Facebook, that information becomes a lot easier to guess. I have actually seen studies in the past that within about 3 minutes on a phone conversation, an attacker could guess the person's password with them having enough research and the amount of information that is out there. So make sure that your passwords are not based on personal information. Contains the bad passwords, things to avoid, are passwords that contain less than 10 characters and that can be found in a dictionary. As I mentioned a little bit ago, the dictionary, there are downloadable dictionaries out there for attackers to attach that dictionary to a program and say, try every single one of these passwords or every one of these words in the dictionary and combinations of words in the dictionary. They typically call it a brute force attack. But if you're using something based on a dictionary word, it becomes much easier to guess, or much easier for that robot or that program to figure out what the password is. Replacing some of those characters with numbers or punctuation definitely helps get rid of the dictionary passwords. I will use 3s instead of E's. So anytime I have a word with an E in it, like impersonate, I would use a 3 instead of the E, and sometimes mix those up. So numbers, characters at the very top can be very, very helpful. And then make sure they're not predictable based on personal information. Use a word of number patterns. That's what I was talking about with replacing numbers, replacing letters with numbers. Sarah, but for the next slide, I think we've got one more poll.
Yes, let me launch that poll for everyone to answer. And the poll question is, are you required to use two-factor authentication to connect to work resources? And you should be able to answer now.
Okay, as folks are answering that poll, and Sarah, if you would just let me know when those are in and completed. From a position of cybersecurity, encryption is a big thing to consider. Emails, what a lot of folks don't realize about email is the basic system of emails in its underlying infrastructure is one that is not inherently secure. It is actually transmitted across the internet in plain text. And so anytime you have information that you don't necessarily, you wouldn't leave on a piece of paper on a table in a restaurant, that's probably something that you want to encrypt on the outbound. And what the encryption does is it will send a link to the user to log in so that they can view that email, and it makes sure it's encrypted from end to end. That can be very, very, very important when sending specifically bank account information, passwords, things that you would not want others to see. Any conversation with my banker that has identifiable information, tax IDs, social security numbers, signatures, always goes through an encryption process before it leaves. One place that is, depending on your configuration, potentially an exception is when you're trading emails internally. Those don't necessarily, they don't leave the system and transfer between email addresses in an unencrypted manner. They usually stay essentially inside the office. It would be very similar to taking a report from the printer, handing it to your coworker. Because it does not leave the front door, you automatically have some security. Encryption of computers. That is important if a laptop or a workstation is stolen or the hard drive is removed. And the way that works is if the encryption process essentially ties that hard drive to the device. And so without the hard drive, if the hard drive is removed from the device and it does not see the encryption chip that is in the workstation or the laptop, it will ask for an encryption key in order to see that laptop. And work computers, if it is the laptop is stolen, you have kind of two options there. You can have it boot up and ask for a password, or our more secure customers will require it to have a password before it even boots. And so if that balances that security, that usability. If it doesn't need to be super secure, booting up and asking for the password before is fine. If you're working in a banking sector or a healthcare sector, sometimes you want that additional security of the initial password before the device even boots. Patching and updates, these are critical. The number of times we have seen compromises because patches were not completed, were not installed, is significant. It's one of the higher risks. A lot of the malware that we heard prior to this was based on operating systems that were not being patched. And it's a huge concern. And obviously password length and complexity. We touched on that briefly. The length of the password, the complexity of the password, as well as the rotation of the password, meaning are you changing it every 90 days so that it is not guessable, or one high area for risk is existing employees that have left the business. I've had customers in the past where they asked me, this employee left, do they still have access to our systems? Well, if you, the user, haven't changed your password in a year and a half and they knew what your password was, then yes, they will still have access to your information or your data. Sarah, we're at the two-factor authentication. Did the polls finish up?
Yes, they did, and I'll share results. So we have a 44% yes, 33% no, and 22% said I don't know.
Thank you. So two-factor authentication, when it is defined by the two factors, and so it is two different things: something you know, which is your password, and then something you have, meaning it could be a cell phone, it could be an application on the cell phone that reads you a number, and so every time you log in, it asks you for that number, or it texts you a 6-digit number. Anybody that, when you log into your banking, it sends you a text, or it sends you an email, or it requires you to use a token like this in order to access your banking. That is the second factor, something that you must physically have with you. One concern with the two-factor authentication is SMS or text to the cell phones. That is one that is likely a little less secure than a dongle or a device or a 6-digit code within an application. The reason being, if I can convince a cell phone provider that I am you, and I can get them to activate a SIM with your number, now it's something I, the attacker, have and you don't. Where the applications like the Google Authenticator, the Sophos Authenticator, or the Microsoft Authenticator, that is on the device and is not movable without your consent. And feel free to put questions in the control panel about the two-factor. If you're not having to answer another set, it is not considered true two-factor. So, for instance, when you log into a bank account and they ask you for a security word, your mother's maiden name, or last place you lived, or your best friend's middle name, or your parents' middle name, those are all things you know and can be gleaned from social media, several places. That's not something you have, and so is not true two-factor authentication. One that emails you and requires you to click an additional link or emails you with additional numbers, that is the two-factor. You have access, or something you have is your email account and access to get that email, not just knowing an additional piece of information. I personally recommend two-factor authentication in as many places as possible. I have it on everything that I use. I have it on my Amazon account. I have it on my Facebook account. I have it on my Dropbox, my Microsoft Office accounts. Everything that I can possibly put two-factor on, I have two-factor authentication available. Because of the nature of my business, I need to be more secured. There are also devices. Some businesses will use them. My last example is this, which is a security key, which there are particular websites that I log into that I am required for my Google account. I must insert that into the computer and press the button in order for it to authenticate me in addition to my password. This section is going to touch on the human side. Just as a lot of us are working remotely, so are the scammers. What a lot of folks don't realize is that intrusion and hackers and cybersecurity, it is a business. It has managers, it has owners, it has operators. And with the advent of cloud, Amazon Cloud and Google Cloud, they are having access to very, very similar resources for distributing attacks. And so it's again that balance where we are looking at ease of use versus security. So we have seen in emails and our security that there's been a huge increase in DocuSign phishing attempts, very specifically driven by the payroll protection program. Most banks were using DocuSign to have their documents signed, and we've had at least one customer that had a fake DocuSign that they started filling out information, and it created a compromise in their mailbox. We're also seeing email traffic greatly increasing as we're able to have less face-to-face conversations. And so be concerned, even if it looks like it's someone coming from someone that you expect. Make sure to review the links before clicking on them. Make sure that the names are spelled right, that the email address is spelled right. It's very easy to send an email that looks right, but comes from a slightly different address where I've changed one letter in the domain. And they are very, very, very conscious of, and they're crafty. They're very, very good at getting links clicked on And just be aware, make sure you're watching the address bar, make sure you're watching the link as you're browsing to websites to make sure you're at the right place. I have seen emails that look like they're coming from DocuSign, but the email address was a D0C instead of as DOC. So something to be very careful of. The phishing attacks, the DocuSign, and email traffic is contributing to a lot of concern, a lot of extra traffic. One of the things to watch out for with regard to your mailbox, your email box, excuse me, check your forwarding rules. Forwarding rules, if someone has compromised your mailbox, you'll find rules potentially in your mailbox that will look for a subject line of password. Anytime you get an email that says password reset, forward it out to a different mailbox. That is a sure sign that the mailbox is being attacked and compromised. If you're suddenly missing emails in your inbox, or they're showing up in your deleted items and you didn't delete them, or recipients that you've been sending mail to that may be in your address book reporting that they've received them, but you don't have anything in your sent items. So a couple of the places to look: check your rules, make sure things aren't being forwarded, automatically deleted, or also watch your sent items to make sure items are not going out that you are not sending. And last but not least, watch out for the coronavirus scams. We're seeing a lot of these. Be extra suspicious about any messages that have to do with the coronavirus. There are emails going around about deliveries, and people are clicking on those links and providing private information that they shouldn't. And then extortion emails that are threatening, saying, we've seen emails where people are threatening to compromise or infect the person with coronavirus if they don't send money or follow this instruction. There's a lot of that going around. So to leave you, to finish up, don't be click happy. Don't click on something that smells funny. It potentially can be. And then figure out, if you don't know, who you should report suspicious activity to, and report it immediately. IT folks would much rather be bothered with the, hey, can you look at this, versus the, hey, I clicked on this and now I think somebody has compromised my mailbox. And that is my last slide. So if you want to open it up or read questions, Sarah, I'll be glad to answer any questions we have in the last couple of minutes.
All right, let me go back to, here we go. All right, if we have any questions, like Sean said, he's happy to answer them. We'll wait a little bit, see if there are any coming through. And Sean, thank you so much for being our guest speaker today and providing all this great information regarding working remotely and the security measures that we all need to take.
Glad to help, and increase two-factor authentication everywhere.
Definitely think I need to look at some passwords, make sure they're a lot longer. So the audience, you're not the only one who answered no to that for 16 characters, 14, 16, one of the
14.
two.
I found one just the other day that was only 8 characters, and I changed it.
Oh goodness. And Beverly says, thank you. It was an excellent presentation. So
you're very welcome.
All right, well, I think that we're good. I don't see any other questions coming in. I appreciate you again, Sean, for being here and being our guest speaker. And thank you everyone for joining. We will send out an email to everyone with the recording and the slide deck. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us and we're happy to help. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. All right.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Everyone have a great rest of your day. Bye.